Good morning, Vinyl community. Here to read out a chapter called A Made Man, Son, First Violations and the Costello Genovese Connection. The black hand that comes from the Catholic Church is the hand of God on the cross. Sounds like Manson's putting down the Catholic Church, but after we read this chapter, you'll understand why. He's put in too many child Catholic homes. Considering the later myth of the criminal Christ, it's fitting that Manson first came to the attention of the law on Christmas Day, 1941, just a few weeks after Pearl Harbor. The baptismal foray into kitty crime was inspired, like many of his early misdemeanors, by his poverty. His neighborhood peers mocked him because Charlie's kin couldn't afford to give him any Christmas presents. He got back on his tormentors by gathering their gifts together and incinerating them in a bonfire. The aggravated children's parents notified the cops. He was roundly scolded and but he beat his first rap. There were no jails for 7-year-olds. That's when they drowned me when I was 7 years old. Manson made much of the programming of his mother's mind, which he says predetermines the stuck-in-the-rut lives of the socially conventional, but the influences of his own childhood set him on the tough road of the outlaw just as much as the straight peers were guided on to their smoother paths. Nobody who knew the Maddox clan would have been surprised that Charlie ended up in the institutional tomb which so many of his kin had been confined. His very existence, he said, is a transgression, his own birth a violation of the rules. I came out of prison the day I was born. My mother was prison. I am prison. I was born illegitimately, says Charlie. So was I, says Steve. And that put me on the other side of the law. I've been an outlaw since I was born. Mother is the icebox. She's the penitentiary. I'm brother in these hallways for 40 years with no snitching on my jacket and asking nobody to protect me and walking on my own 2 feet. Manson himself saw his life of crime as a continuance of a family tradition. He spoke of his years in the hallways of the Always with the kind of pride one might expect to hear from the heir of a respected ancestral concern. I'm still in a cage and I got a tray of food and I've been getting for 60 years and I still have kept my word and never told or ratted on no one and never betrayed my trust like my uncles who died in prisons in the South who refused schools. I've been a ward of the court ever since 1937 when my mom sent me to prison, and I've been in the darkness a lot of the time. Crime ran in the Maddox family long before the myth of the Manson family was born. By the time Charlie was 6 years old, his 21-year-old mother, Kathleen, and his uncle Luther Maddox, was already doing time in Moundsville State Prison. Manson said that he comes from a hard times, bologna for Sunday dinner, and depression. And as with so many country folks during the 30s, worldwide economic disaster. It was destitution rather than born in the bone crookedness that led Manson's mother to commit her one youthful indiscretion. Her first and last larcenous caper set in the pattern of some of the criminal blunderings of her son's future life. Kathleen, then 20, and her 23-year-old brother, Charlie Uncle Luther's desperate attempt to rob one Frank Martin, a man they followed from a tavern in West Virginia and knocked out with a ketchup bottle filled with only sand and only earned them a pitiful loot of either $27 or $35. Reports conflict. Swift arrest and long prison sentence. Kathleen's sentence of 5 years was commuted to 2 for good behavior. Talking about Charlie's mother. This was also the night Charlie's mother tried to foist off her 4-year-and-a-half-year-old son to a waitress in exchange for a bottle of beer. Only added insult to injury, scarring the boy with trust and abandonment wounds that lasted for the rest of his life. The Ferguson branch of the family, who watched Charlie only, brought him to visit his mother once during 2 years in Moundsville. The single visit would form one of the earliest memories, and the shame Kathleen's relatives felt about her imprisonment had an equally strong impact on her son. Moundsville prison was notorious for its death row. During the bloody crime wave unleashed by the Depression, it was so overcrowded that the prison needed to employ several hangmen to carry out all the executions scheduled. Charlie's mother was assigned to the task of cleaning the gallows. Long before her son ended up in the time on San Quentin's death row, Kathleen told him grisly tales of what she saw in the Moundsville grim citadel of state-sanctioned murder. Kathleen struggled with poverty and alcoholism throughout Charlie's childhood, but she never resorted to crime again. Nevertheless, the example she set made larceny look like a viable option for Charlie. Moundsville wasn't the only institution she would have heard about in her early childhood. His grandpa, Charles Maddox, spent time in a local mental hospital, giving to fits of uncontrollable rage to the end. Manson also recalled that a 14-year-old mentally retarded relative known to the family as Wormy died after 2 years of primitive treatment in another nearby nut ward. This sounds like Camarillo Hospital, man. While these enforced lockups didn't bode well for young Charlie's future, they weren't part of the Maddox criminal streak. We've already related to how Manson claimed that his rustic uncle Jess operated a bootleg whiskey-making still. The Maddox moonshine venture came to be seen as a familiar forerunner of Manson's own commerce in illegal substances. One of Charlie's relatives in Kentucky, who put me in touch with the 80, claimed that the Maddoxes could cover their fee undertakers quoted for a proper Christian burial. Supposedly what could be recovered of Uncle Jess's far-flung remains were sold at Duke University's medical school. They were preserved in formaldehyde and put on display. Like the Maddox folklore of supposed familiar relation to actor John Carradine that Charlie claimed, I have yet to locate any definitive proof about Uncle Jess's dramatic end and that any of the local press achieved that would presumably have covered such an event. Although the leaves of the Maddox family tree were aflutter with criminal records, only one of the clan really did honor to the crooked trade. That would be Darwin Scotty Scott, the enterprising brother of Madison's biological father, Colonel. For a time, Uncle Darwin worked for an honest wage. In the early 1940s, he and his brother Colonel and Madison's stepfather, William Manson, who gave Charlie his last name, worked together on the construction of the Kentucky Dam. Soon after Darwin was on the lam, he'd taken up a lucrative career in the armed robbery field. Like Charlie's mother and maternal uncle, Darwin did time in West Virginia Moundsville Penitentiary. His beef was a 63 breaking and entering charge. He served a 2-year sentence for postal money, order theft, one of the petty crimes his nephew Charlie would also serve time for. Darwin was still up to no good on the night of May 27, 69. That's when the amount of stolen cash he kept in his Ashland, Kentucky apartment made him the victim of a fatal robbery himself. When the cops came across Uncle Darwin, 64 years old when he died, he'd been stabbed 18 times with his own kitchen knife. There were apparent signs of violence, the local police told the papers, but there was no apparent signs of what you would call a violent struggle. When his nephew came to the worldwide notoriety later that year, police investigated the possibility that Darwin Scott had been an early victim of the Manson Circle, summer of '69's crime spree. No evidence of this kind was ever found. It would appear that Scott's own criminality did him in, an extremely common occurrence among men in his profession. Nevertheless, several researchers have hastily added Manson's uncle to the list of supposed but unproven missing family member victims. As of this writing, however, the Scott's murder remains unsolved, as like the Manson file remains unsolved. Despite the transgressive antecedents, it was hunger which first honed the young Manson's childhood facility for theft. When left alone for his young mother to fend for himself, Charlie scrambled for survival by shoplifting. For his stealing skills, he said later, helped to teach him how to turn off his thoughts to the presence couldn't be detected. It was here that he developed the magical idea of keeping what he called, I don't get caught thoughts in your mind. At the same time, the difficulties in school intensified. Exactly what ended his brief period of formal education is unclear. Manson attributed it to the time he tried to burn down the school. His more long-lasting reform school career, unsurprisingly, did nothing to reform him. On the contrary, his early institutionalization allowed him to learn how to be a better criminal than older and more experienced budding felons. The previously mentioned Gabald Home for Boys was one of the few institutions in Manson's career behind bars which tried to teach him any sort of skill which might apply to gainful employment. As we've seen, in the first gems of his songwriting talents were hatched during Gabald guitar lessons, and his ability to survive in all of the jails which would house him was greatly enhanced by his monks' boxing lessons. On the eve of the match held by Golden Gloves, he made the first of many escapes. Manson claimed that the monks looked the other way when he fled. All this is contrived. Everything I do is contrived. It's all been contrived by the Catholic Church ever since Father Jabald's School for Boys. They laid the bicycle out there for me to steal, and they put me up in running away, but putting another inmate up to getting me to run away because they couldn't deal with me. I knew that. I knew the priest was an old woman, and I could see straight through him. Charlie fled to Indianapolis. He kept on the streets for nearly a month. Again, he kept himself fed by putting his shoplifting and burglaring skills to use. The first of many vehicle violations came during the desperate stay on the streets of Indianapolis. He grabbed a bicycle from its rider and pedaled away. Charlie's joyride ended his career riding into a cop into the beat. The judge sent Manson to Father Flanagan's Boys Town, when famous from its featured in the film starring Mickey Rooney's absurdly idolized film of the time. This sentence marked Manson's unobtrusive entry into the media. He would become a fixture at 21 years old. A winsome photo of a clean-cut, smiling Charlie, garbed in new suit and tie, was shown in the local Indianapolis newspaper. Boy leaves sinful home for a new life in Boys Town. Read the caption. But 13-year-old Charlie wasn't cut out to be a poster boy for rehabilitation. He tried to escape from his new life a few hours after it started. Here Manson touched on a theme that often surfaced on his own attempt to make sense of his life of crime, but had rarely been noted. In his view, the criminal career was always mystically linked to the Catholic Church, from his earliest incarceration among the brother monks to the later association of the mafia's devout Roman Catholics. His frequent identification of himself as the Pope can be understood in this context. Only 3 weeks later, he succeeded in flying the coop. He accompanied in this breakout for the first of many colorful nickname partners in crime. Long before Red and Blue came along, there was Blackie. Also 13-year-old Blackie Nelson's ace in the hole was a crooked uncle in Peoria, Illinois. The boys' plan was to seek sanctuary there. Charlie and Blackie's cross-country jaunt was financed by cash liberated from a casino and grocery store. Their stick-ups were carried out with stolen gun and secured along the way. The risk taken on the journey marked Charlie's transition from juvenile delinquent to outlaw. In a later career, Manson's real specialty was always grand theft auto. The crime scene was brought the pubescent pair to Peoria, also saw the first of Charlie's car thefts. As soon as they showed up in those Hot Wheels, Blackie's uncle put the newly arrived artful Dodgers to work right away. He told them what stores to break into. Boys were rewarded with their services with a pathetic fraction of the night's booty worth of cheapskate Fagin himself. This operation lasted only 3 nights before the cops nabbed them. According to police records, young Charlie hadn't yet taken up the no-snitching code. He told the arresting officer he had put them up to the heists. Blackie's uncle was busted along with his junior henchman. Another bang at the gravel sent him off to the next stop, the Indiana School for Boys at Plainsfield. Mansfield will remember this hellhole former after as Painesville. Even before he was registered, Charlie saw the writing on the wall. He tried to break it for it when it was left alone in the entrance hall. Run by uninformed sadists who got their kicks beating, flogging, and raping their young charges. Plainfield was a clear case of the lunatics running the asylum. Manson, already traumatized by his mother's desertion of him, was now subject to the physical and psychic scars he sustained from all the excessive corporate chastisement he suffered at the time. He spent 3 long traumatic years under Painesville's lash. He tried to escape from its program of systematic abuse 17 times before he got out for good. Each attempt was rewarded with the long bouts of solitary confinement, which even then began to stir his mystical awakening. On the 18th breakout, he and his cohorts snatched a car and headed west to California. They crossed over a state line in a stolen car, a bad move. That instantly turned a petty offense into a federal beef. At the time the trio of Painesville escaped, drove into the police cordon, lay in wait for them in Beaver, Utah. They'd stolen and discarded 14 cars, and they'd crossed enough state borders to guarantee that the serious federal time. Many of the Manson's prolonged 69 prison stretches were based on minor technicalities of this kind. In the 1999 California Department of Corrections Departmental Review Board report on inmate Manson Charles, CDC number B33920, this voyage was given special emphasis. It's the first offense in the rap sheet of the listed as significant criminal history. Inmate Manson's criminal record began February 16th, 1951, 3 days before Steve McElwain was born. It is a juvenile at the age of 17, as subject violated the Dyer Act in Utah and was remanded to federal custody. A judge ordered Manson to be detained in the federal juvenile system until he reached his legal majority at 21. The sentence began at the National Training School for Boys in Washington. There, when Dr. Block, the reformatory's resident shrink, another Jolly West type, picked up the unique career distinction to becoming Charles Manson's first psychiatrist. 3 months of therapy ensued. The doctor warily noted in his report that Charlie already showed signs of being a slick, institutionalized youth with a talent for manipulating the system. But Block's sympathy for Manson grew as they got to know each other. He concluded by observing that Charlie was an extremely sensitive boy who was not yet given up in terms of securing some kind of love and affection from the world. Based on this conclusion, Block's recommendation that Manson's request for a transfer to the more lax National Bridge Honor Camp be honored. Of course, the fact that any authority would ever write anything even remotely positive of Manson is frequently interrupted as proofs positive that the young charmer must certainly have conned their therapist with his already developing hypno powers. In any event, Block's encouraging assessment boded well for his quick parole. Another unexpected way out of the institutional nightmare appeared at this time. Aunt Joan Ferguson, who had given up the incorrigible Charlie many years earlier after visiting him for his 17th birthday, she had a change of heart. Charlie's aunt wrote to the court offering to let him live with her again. If he were released, the Ferguson promised they'd help him find employment. Apparently, despite this Jennifer offer, Manson's painful memories of his last stay with the couple caused him to conclude that being locked up was better than that. In February of 52, right before his release was due to be considered, Manson evaded a furlough to Camp Ferguson by orchestrating a contrived disciplinary offense. He was discovered raping a fellow inmate who he'd forced to submit by holding a razor to his throat. At least that was how it made it look. Officials interpreted this as Manson's deliberate bid to sabotage his own chances for parole. Much later, Manson admitted that this scenario was prearranged with his willing victim, who was told to squeal. Charlie made me do it when we were caught. This wouldn't be the last time that Manson tried to stay locked up just at the moment he was due to be freed, nor will it be the last time that we'll hear an accomplice cry out the plaintive plea, Charlie made me do it. The incident means that Dr. Block's positive report and the Fergusons' attempt to intervene on their nephew's behalf went for naught. Though through Manson's own doing and right on the brink of what could have been a turning point away from incarceration, from now on, Manson was increasingly seen as a hard case requiring much higher security than ever been seen. At the interim, he was truffled off to federal penitentiary in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania. While he was there, the courts deliberated over his fate. During one of the few stays in the East Coast prison, the 18-year-old made his first contact with the true rulers of the underworld, sometimes through ignorance, sometimes through deliberate desires to deceive. The purveyors of the helter-skelter myth have tended to underplay the importance of his turning point in Manson's prison career. Manson and the mob does not compute to the beloved myth of satanic hippies, race war, and secret messages from the Beatles, of which the audience can't seem to get enough of. The mob and those slaughtered innocents on Cielo and Waverly Drives, it can't be. And so the crucial factor linking the perpetrators to the casualties of the summer of the 69's war between rival factions of drug dealers has been almost entirely ignored, which was precisely the goal of the misdirection conjured up by the judicial sleight of hand so shrewdly executed in court during Manson's trial. But Manson himself, of all the love of mystification, always made the significance of his connection explicitly clear. In many of his interviews, as journalists asked him the same old insane, irrelevant questions, he can be seen trying to shake them out of the slumber so that they'll get what he's trying to tell them. By the time he met young Charles Manson on the Petersburg chow line in '52, Francesco Castiglia had fought his way to the pinnacle of gangland's ranks. Man-made, worldwide genuflected before the fight of the El Capo del Tutti, Capi, boss of all bosses. His accent from Gooder-snipe to Godfather archetype, Castiglia acquired the more Americanized name of Frank Costello. Born dirt poor in Loripol, Italy, he immigrated to New York as a child. He grew up in the mean streets of Harlem. As the exiled Lucky Luciano's designated North American ambassador, he became the unraveled sovereign of the East Coast Syndicate. The complex crime network he controlled made deep inroads into politics, show business, and labor unions, which ruled both branches of public entertainment, controlled based on the generous payoffs with Frank the Hands Costello, made to all the right people. The press tagged him as Prime Minister of the Underworld. Costello was flattered, but he modestly demurred that he was just a simple businessman. Costello's skill at covering his tracks was abetted by the fact that nobody was brave enough to risk the consequences of testifying against him. He earned his reputation of crime boss the law wouldn't touch. I think we're going to stop here. This is going to be like a 3-part chapter. This is a long chapter. It's the beginning of Charlie's life, what they did to him, how he ended up the way he is. So we want to thank the vinyl community members, the crime members, and all our friends, and God bless all the children. Everyone have a great day.